Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
GSMC Football Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. Obviously today we're going to get into some more NFL talk today, some college talk. And around this time of the year, when we say college talk, not necessarily college football, but the players from college football who are entering the NFL. We're going to give you all the latest news going into the combine that is beginning this weekend. Also, some news and notes around the league. Obviously, teams have been interviewed at these scouting combine media sessions. So we're learning new things. We're learning teams' intentions going into free agency next month, and maybe some of their intentions going into the draft. So there's obviously going to be a lot of news being leaked in between now and there in terms of what people want to do. Maybe franchising certain players, giving contracts to certain players. The franchise tag the franchise tag window is about to open also within 24 hours. So obviously, that's obviously a very exciting time, to see what teams decide to franchise, who they decide to let walk. So, obviously we're going to cover all that today on the podcast to the best of my abilities all time. So, we're going to get right into it now. We're going to start with obviously a big news topic that could linger over the season if things are not resolved. The CBA. The CBA deal is up next year after this current NFL season. And obviously there's been negotiations in place to, fix and create a new CBA deal that works for both sides. Obviously that's what these CBA negotiations are about. It's the owners and the players. So earlier I reported on the earlier podcast, Monday with Ethan, that the owners have proposed a deal to the players, and the players, NFLPA, had initially denied it, or not denied. They postponed their voting and voted on it Tuesday. Tuesday they approved it. So now it goes to the players, the actual players, the reps for each team. And the players have been very vocal about this deal. Multiple players have came out on social media like Richard Sherman, Russell Wilson, J.J. Watt, Aaron Rodgers, many big names, to voice their displeasure for this deal, because one of the things that I think a lot of players are looking at is if we're going to add that 17th game, we're going to need more time off. That's what it seems like a lot of this is surrounded by, is that 17th game. There were reports going into the voting for the NFLPA that they were split because of the 17th game. And I think one of the things Aaron Rodgers said in his post is that he feels like, well, if we're going to add a 17th game, we need more free time during the offseason. I think a lot of people feel like I think a lot of players feel like the OTAs aren't really needed necessarily, because you really don't do anything too much. I mean, yeah, you do, because they say sometimes a lot of these OTAs is just conditioning and strength work, and then maybe one day diving into some stuff, but nothing really on the field to that extent. And so some players feel like, well, we don't really need OTAs. We can train on our own to do the same thing and then really get into shape when it gets closer to training camp, or wait till training camp, because that's really when you start working and doing things with the playbook in the first place. So obviously a lot of players, like I said, have been vocal about this. A lot of players feel like that this just isn't going to work for them. People are very much substantially standing on their standpoint and their views on this and thinking that this is not a good deal for us. Obviously the owners did propose that, we're going to cut down some days of off-season programs. We're adding about a 1% increase to revenue. We're going to allow rosters to maybe have the entire roster activated instead of just increasing the roster sizes for player safety. But obviously the players feel like that's not enough. So it sounds like, even though these are the big name players, that players right now are not looking good, are not liking this. I think the thing about the players is that they sound like that if it has to go to a lockout, they'll do it because they don't want to just give the owners what they want and then it's not benefiting them. And so that's why you've even had players saying, like Marquise Pouncey saying, hey, listen, I don't want to take this deal. And he sounded like if we go to a lockout, hey, if any young players need help paying rent or anything like that, call me. I got you. Or call any of us stars. We got you. Because we understand that if we do go to a lockout, people ain't getting paid. So unless they say that you're not making as much money as I make, you may not have the money you needed to survive or maintain a certain lifestyle. So you may be like, and so they're like, hey, I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll support you because we're all in this together and we're trying to get what we think we rightly deserve. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this final voting process with the players. Like I said, it's only been 5, 6, 7 players who came out and not agreed with it. I'm sure you don't want to just take that and say, okay, that's how every player feels. But I'm sure since these are bigger name guys, a lot of people may look at these players as leaders and leaders of the players. So they may sit there and be like, okay, well, if he doesn't like it, then I don't like it either. So I definitely feel like this is going to be a very interesting situation moving forward. Obviously, the main thing is you would feel like if they don't get a deal done during the offseason, they're probably not going to they're obviously not going to revisit it till after the season. So then that's when you're hitting that point of free agency and all that stuff where, you know, you want to know what the numbers are looking like. Some teams are going to be hesitant to give contract extensions and et cetera. Obviously this year you can franchise 2 players because since the rule is that the CBA is up the next season, obviously since you don't know if you're even going to have next off season officially, they're allowing you just to go ahead and franchise 2 guys this year going into next year. So just in case a deal doesn't get reached and done. So this is going to be a very interesting situation. I think that players are definitely going to sit down on what they believe in and think we're not going to let the owners just get what they want. I think Russell Wilson said it in his post. He was talking about how like MLB players and NBA players get what they want that benefits the players, and that's why players in terms of these types of agreements don't usually have too many issues because the NBA is a players' league. You can honestly say MLB is a players' league. The only league that's not a players' league is the NFL, which people may consider the highest grossing sport that we have. And yet it feels like the owners still have more control than the players do. So I'm sure obviously that's something that's a talk for discussion. And I'm sure that will be something that some players listen and hear from Russell and say, I agree with that. And sometimes players are, like I said, are willing to kind of go to bat, go to war, miss some games, miss some paychecks. Because, yeah, everybody wants their money, but they also want the right agreements for the players, for them, and then the players coming up. Because usually these are like 10-year agreements. So for the next decade, you want to make sure any player that comes into the league isn't getting screwed by the owners in their eyes. And you're making sure that everybody gets comparable compensation for if we do add that 17 game. Or if we do add anything else that could potentially put us more in danger. But also just making sure that if we do decide to let y'all have something, we're getting the right compensation for it. So then we're happy and then everybody can be happy at the end of the day. But that's just my thoughts on that. But we're going to switch into another story right now. And we're going to switch about some Cam Newton. It's been reported that Cam Newton has been working out around the Panthers organization. And the coaches so far like what they're seeing and right now are planning to go into next year as Cam Newton as their starting quarterback. Obviously, this is a little bit different from what we've been hearing all year as people have been saying that they're thinking about trading Cam because of the fact that, you know, he's had injuries and then maybe it's time to move on. Obviously, the Panthers are in a dilemma, though. If you got rid of Cam, would you be able to find someone to replace him? That would be the dilemma. So you might be better off keeping Cam Newton for at least maybe one more year. I think that would probably be the smartest decision for them to make is keeping Cam around. I don't think you want to make any rash decisions and let him go because you got to make sure that you have a replacement for him. That's what every team's biggest fear when it comes to the most important position in football, quarterback, is not having a guy that can replace the guy that they are about to let go of. You never want to do that because if you don't have a replacement plan, it just feels like you're going into the season just, we're hoping. And you don't want to do that with fan bases because that could turn fan bases off and not make them tune in and support the team. But I think that, like I said, this is probably a good move on their part to go ahead and keep Cam around. We'll see what happens in the draft. They might draft a guy that they may want to develop for a year and think, okay, maybe we can get him ready in a year. Or then when Cam's contract comes up, then we can go ahead and let Cam walk and go for our next guy as our next quarterback of the Carolina Panthers as they think towards the future, which I think every team looks at and thinks for is the future, because you never know what's going to happen moving forward, especially under new head coach Matt Rule. Obviously, he's trying to make his direction and put his stamp on this team and his coaching. So we'll have to see what happens moving forward. But right now, the Panthers are sticking with Cam Newton as their quarterback going into the 2020-2021 season. Coming up next, we're going to get some news and notes around the league. We're going to talk about Phillip Rivers being tied to the Colts and Raiders. Are the Raiders really going to trade Derek Carr? And the reviewable PI call that was made a challenge last year might be coming out of the challenge booths this coming season. All that and more.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the latest CBA negotiations going on right now, how a lot of the players around the league are speaking out on this new proposal, not liking the 17 game, not feeling like they have enough free time, not feeling like they have enough compensation and power on their side, and the owners control everything. So obviously that's going to be an ongoing saga going into the offseason and potentially next offseason too, as we all hope for not a lockout. But, obviously these two sides are going to battle for bargaining rights, because that's what, happens in the business side of these things. When you're in a business league, you got to make tough business decisions. We also talked about Cam Newton sticking around for the Carolina Panthers, as they've agreed to go ahead and keep him around for another year. So Cam Newton looks like he will be the starting quarterback of the Panthers. Obviously, but I don't be surprised if they make any moves to try to maybe get a guy for the future. Because, some people were thinking they should have kept Cam anyway and potentially used him as a yearly gap quarterback for the next guy they may want to actually have play. So that was what we talked about last segment. Now we're going to get into this segment. And we're going to talk about some news and notes around the league, starting with Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers has been tied and linked to the Oakland Raiders and the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, these are two teams that potentially could move off their last year's starting quarterbacks. Obviously, with the Colts, Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett is an average starter in this league. He's a guy who can win you some games. But in terms of a 16-game guy that can get you over the top, I think last year pretty much maybe solidified that he couldn't. Now, in his argument, in his defense, T.Y. Hilton was hurt a lot of the year. They had injuries. Things happen. Obviously, they were unprepared because Andrew Luck retired unexpectedly at the beginning of the season. But I think the Colts feel like they've seen enough from Jacoby Brissett to know that he's probably not going to be the guy going forward, but he can probably be a top-end backup in the league. And like I said, a guy who can win you games. Obviously, on the Oakland side of things, that's always been an interesting scenario. It feels like ever since John Gruden got to Oakland, he was never completely sold on Derek Carr. And now with them moving to Vegas, they may feel like they need another guy going into that new stadium. And they're thinking about replacing Derek Carr. Mike Mayock, the GM for the Oakland Raiders, came out and saying that he likes him a lot, but at the same time, they will explore options if they can get better. And so that obviously brings up rumors that they may be willing or wanting to move off of him, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But when it comes to Phillip Rivers, obviously, I feel like with him in this situation, both teams have pretty good offensive lines, which I think Chargers had a very weak offensive line last year, obviously injuries, but they weren't a very strong offensive line. And one thing about Phillip Rivers, since he's older and he's not that athletic, you need to make sure that you can protect him, because Phillip Rivers can make plays for you. It's just he makes mistakes. obviously you hope you can cut down on those mistakes. You don't want to make too many of those mistakes at the same time. I think it'll be interesting if he did decide to go to the Indianapolis Colts. I think the thing is you have to really look at this and you have to compare it. Compare it to Jacoby Brissett. How many more wins is he going to get you? Is he that much better than Jacoby Brissett at this point in his career? If this was Phil Rivers 3 years ago, you'd probably be like, yeah, this is a pretty good move. Now you may feel like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm ready to make that kind of move. And I'm sure that that's something that they're going to think about and discuss. Obviously, like I said, if he goes to the Oakland Raiders, again, same situation. Compared to Derek Carr, is he really an upgrade? I mean, there may be some people who will sit here and think Derek Carr is the better quarterback between the two. You know, and I think so. It really just depends. Do you really think that you're getting better as a team if you made that move? It's kind of risky with Phil Rivers because it's just like compared to every quarterback situation, how much better are we getting at that position compared to who we just had? You know, that's kind of going to be the big question here when it comes to that situation, in both of those situations, if Phil Rivers is connected to those two teams. Now, speaking more about Derek Carr, obviously the Raiders obviously have kind of made it known that they're open to looking into offers and deals for Derek Carr if they feel like they can get a better quarterback in return. And obviously that's why they've been in on the Philip Rivers rumors. They've been in on the Tom Brady rumors. They have been in on many different quarterbacks who could potentially be available. But we don't know if they're actually going to make any moves. Obviously, Derek Carr this past year had probably one of his best statistical seasons ever that he's been in the league. But there are some questions within the organization. Can he legitimately get them over the hump and make them that team? And I think that's what I think John Gruden was never sold on with him. I feel like he just never knew if he really thought, could he be that guy to get us over the hump? You know, and I think that's kind of where we are with that situation. I think that's why we have these discussions. That's why these discussions are being had. And obviously we have to see what teams feel like is the best move for them moving forward and who they feel like is going to give them the best chance to be successful. I'm sure Derek Carr, I feel like some teams feel like, oh, we would like him. That's why I wouldn't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Tom Brady left New England, if the New England trades for Derek Carr. I would not be shocked if that happened. Don't be surprised if San Diego tries to get in on it, if he's made available. Don't be surprised if Tampa Bay tries to get in on it, if Jameis leaves and they can't get a guy. I mean, Derek Carr could honestly be a very hot commodity this offseason if the quarterback market shifts a certain way. And if it shifts a certain way, he could end up being traded to a team that now needs a quarterback that feels like they have talent and says, well, Derek Carr probably wasn't worse than what we just had and potentially could be better in our opinion, so it could only make our team better, which then puts us in position to be more successful down the line, which is what you want. You want to be successful down the line. You want to be able to be successful moving into the future and feeling like your quarterback situation is going to be solidified going into the future. And clearly, you just want to make sure that you're doing the right things that are necessary to be successful. And you don't want to make that trade if you don't think Derek Carr could be the guy. Now, right now, I think everybody's maybe still thinking Derek Carr is going to be the guy because, again, I don't think Oakland's going to make that trade unless they know they can get a better player, unless they get offered something that they cannot turn down. But if not, then I think they'll hang on for another year. Now, one thing that does help out with the Derek Carr trade, if they did trade him, is that he has no guaranteed money left. And he's only getting paid, I believe, only $19 million next year. So he's not getting paid a lot in terms of quarterback money, and there's no guaranteed money, so it's not going to hurt them if they got rid of him. So clearly they're in a very good position right now with Derek Carr, where if they want to make that move, it wouldn't be like, oh, we got to take on a lot of dead money and a team has to take on this very large salary, and that could be an issue. It's not too big of a salary. Don't have to take any dead money on. So it definitely makes him a more, I think, valuable trade target in that regard because he's not as expensive to receive. Now, expensive in terms of how much is Oakland going to want back. But in most situations, it really just depends. If they were able to somehow pick up Tom Brady, well, clearly Derek Carr is going to be on the trade market, and they're going to be more willing and willing and wanting to make a trade. Where if they don't pick up anybody who they think is better, we'll have to see what happens. But lastly, before we end this segment, we're going to talk about the PI call that was made a reviewable challenge after the year before last year's NFC Championship game, where the Saints were a lot of people feel like finessed by the referees by them missing a obvious PI call, which I feel like the league may have overreacted and made this a challengeable call. And a lot of PI calls were not overturned this offseason, and I think they look into it and they think going into these meetings that they do every year, the committee meetings, to make sure that they make necessary rule changes or they want to keep certain rules, that this is something that I think a lot of teams are going to probably get rid of when they try to vote to keep the rule. I think they just feel like, well, we don't really need it. Sometimes human error can happen, but I don't think you need to be able to challenge something like that. I just think that was an overreaction to what happened in the St. Louis New Orleans game, and I think that this is probably a rule that's unneeded, and I think it would be a good idea if they do go ahead and just go ahead and end that and be fine with going back to just natural human error. Because like I said, you're not always going to make that call right. Sometimes it's a bang-bang call. It can go either way. But I don't think you need to be able to challenge it unless it got egregious in multiple games where it's like there's no way of avoiding it. But coming up next, before we take a break here, we're going to talk about Tua versus Burrow, the debate. Miami's making a lot of calls ahead of the draft, expecting to be active. I'll tell you about that. And Austin Hooper, the Atlanta Falcons are letting Austin Hooper test free agency. All that and more coming up next.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we talked about some news and rumors around the league. Obviously, the Raiders potentially moving on from Derek Carr and maybe willing to make him available depending on what happens in the free agency market this offseason and who goes to who. Obviously, this also gets connected to Phillip Rivers because that's who he's been linked to, the Oakland Raiders and the Indianapolis Colts, who are both potentially, we know the Colts are, but potentially Oakland looking for quarterbacks to lead their team, as he's a guy that maybe some teams are willing to give his last hurrah to potentially have a winning team and potentially maybe make some history potentially if they decide to go ahead and bring him in. And also the reviewable PI call looks like it's not going to be back again next season. The expectation is when they vote on keeping the rule, it will be declined, and then they will take it out of the rule book, and now it will become just strictly a judgment call again once the season starts back up in fall. But now we're going to get into some draft talk here. And obviously there's been a debate going on since obviously Burrow's had this fantastic season he had at LSU where, obviously he rose up the charts. He wasn't even a top 5 quarterback before the season started. Now he's about to go number 1 overall. He's had probably the greatest statistical season that any quarterback has had. And some people think the greatest season any player has had. And, obviously he's been a guy who, people look at and think, wow, this guy could really be great. And then you have Tua, a guy who has been great since entering the national championship against Georgia in the second half, has dealt with some injuries, but when he has been healthy, has been one of the best players in all of college football. And the debate is just who is the best quarterback right now in this class and who's going to be the best quarterback moving forward. Some people think that Joe Burrow is a good prospect, but not a great prospect. Some people think Tua is a great prospect. Some people think both are a great prospect. Some think they're a good prospect. Obviously, people are worried about Tua's injuries concerns because he's been hurt. Some people are worried that Joe Burrow, since he only had one great year and then maybe he had one decent year, is he closer to that decent year as a player, or is he closer to the great year as a player? Plus, a lot of people like to look at the fact that if he does go to Cincinnati, how would that affect his career? Would it hurt him or would it help him? So that debate will rage. Obviously, Tua is a guy who a lot of people compare to Russell Wilson. They think he could be a Russell Wilson player. And if he's like anything like Russell Wilson, that means you're going to probably have a great career and probably make the Hall of Fame, as we all expect Russell Wilson to be one day. And I can see it. He's 6 foot. He's not the tallest guy in the world, but he has great arm talent, accurate, one of the best deep ball throwers in this draft, and a little bit mobile. Now, obviously, maybe in terms of body type, he's not as some people think maybe as built for the league right now, but obviously he can get into shape and get into that type of build that is needed. Burrow, on the other hand, is not obviously, he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, but can make all the throws. A great anticipation thrower, a guy who has a moxie about him when he steps in the room that okay, yeah, we got a guy. We have a guy who we think we can win with. He gives you that confidence about himself. And, after the season he's had, he has every reason to feel that way after the season he just produced and put out there at LSU, leading them to a national championship. So, for me, I feel like this is going to be a very interesting situation moving forward in terms of these two, because they're going to be connected. Who's going to be the better quarterback? Obviously, Tua, it feels like, is the most valued because there are multiple teams that are interested and may trade up to get him, or we would think if he stays, nobody trades up, then probably Miami would get him at number 5. Burrow is obviously a guy that we expect to go number 1 overall to the Cincinnati Bengals, no question about it. So it really just depends on what you think of both quarterbacks. It's a debate that's probably going to be raging on till we see maybe after the first contract where they both are in their careers. Obviously, we hope that both of them end up being great quarterbacks, because that way, at least, even if we may say someone was better overall in the career, you can't say it was because one of them failed either. But I think this is going to be something that people are going to look into, obviously. Obviously, both of them are probably not going to work out too much at the draft this weekend, or at the combine this weekend, and rightfully so, because, obviously they don't need to do too much. They just need to go out there and just, do what they do best. And I'm sure at their pro days they're going to show out. And then when the draft comes around, they'll be top picks. So, but in other draft news, the Miami Dolphins is reported to be very active calling multiple teams. Now, the question that we're asking, what does this mean? I don't think this means anything for their 5th overall draft pick. I don't think. Now, they could trade up to make sure they can secure a guy like Tua, but I think that this is just a part of the plan that they established last season. Obviously, if you paid attention to the Miami Dolphins or you're a Miami Dolphins fan, they have made a lot of trades where they trade a lot of their best players away to accumulate a lot of draft picks. They almost have 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 thirds. They literally almost have 2 in every position. So they have a lot of draft capital to trade. And that could make them trade for particular players, trade for picks, trade for different things. And so they're currently wheeling and dealing, probably trying to maybe get some deals in place potentially. Because sometimes, teams call these teams knowing they're not going to actually make the deal till closer to draft day, but they want to already go ahead and get initial talks going. Let the team know, hey, we're interested. We might want to make a little deal here, and when this happens, and then that team knows, okay, well, if we want to make this deal or we feel comfortable making this deal, we know this team's going to be ready to make that deal with us. So I think that's going to be something that we have to look out for. Obviously, like I said, Miami is kind of doing almost like a Moneyball type of thing. You have a lot of capital. Now, how do you invest it? What do you do with that capital? Can you make something great out of it? Can you make something multiply? You would think that, obviously, with Brian Flores, I think a lot of people are encouraged after the first year he's had in Miami, after it looks like a team that had no talent. getting players sometimes that weren't playing as great before in the previous regimes to start playing well, and to also help develop talent that they had. I think people are wondering, man, Miami really could be a team that you really don't know how good they're going to be next year. Because if they hit on draft picks and they have a lot of, they have almost $100 million in cap in free agency. Like they can make a ton of moves this offseason. This Miami Dolphins team will be tremendously different than what they were this year. And that's going to make them a very interesting team to keep up with. And obviously the draft is a big part of their plans and a big part of the changes they want to make into the future as they're trying to get them back on track going into next season and potentially going into that third year, which is obviously sometimes the most crucial year in most head coaches' careers, and maybe making a playoff run potentially. And lastly, the Atlanta Falcons have decided to allow Austin Hooper to walk in the free agency, which probably spells the end of his tenure in Atlanta. Hooper is expected to get one of the hugest contracts in tight end history. Usually when you hit free agency, the reason why sometimes prices can get so high is because of the bidding war. Usually Austin Hooper is probably the best tight end on the market right now too, in terms of a guy that's going to actually hit it. So a lot of people feel like with the Falcons strapped with cap room, they've decided to just allow him to walk. Obviously this is going to hurt their offense, but I'm sure that Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff are going to figure out how to adjust to that loss that they're making in this adjustment that they're going to make. Obviously, I know also a lot of Atlanta fans are not particularly happy about this, but I think it's just a part of the cattle season of the salary cap. Like I said, George Kittle, and Travis Kelce are expected to be 3 tight ends to basically reset the entire tight end market and just create a huge amount of money flowing into top receiving tight ends. Never forget that Jimmy Graham tried to be the first, and the Saints said, well, we're not going to pay you receiver-like money. We're going to pay you top tight end money, which isn't a lot, I guess, to the tight ends now. And so he's supposed to be part of that resetting of the market. And so it'll be definitely interesting to see how much he actually hits when he hits the open market. Because sometimes usually that first team that gets that visit is usually the team that signs him, because they probably know we probably need to go ahead and offer him a huge contract where he can't turn it down and, pretty much, go ahead and get him locked up going into next season. But coming up next, we're going to also talk about some free agency news. It's some team movement where the Browns are eyeing Case Keenum and Chase Daniel. Titans are working to get a deal done with Ryan Tannehill, and the 49ers could potentially trade for a wide receiver. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some NFL draft news. We talked about Tua and Burrow, the debate between those two. Who's better? Who do you prefer going into this year's NFL draft in their careers moving forward? We also talked about the Miami Dolphins being very active ahead of the draft, expecting to be very, very active on draft day and very, very active in free agency. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, what moves are going to be made. Expect to hear their name a lot this offseason with moves and trades and different things of that nature, because they're planning to go ahead with their second year of their rebuilding plan and try to get this team right back on track as they try to build a team with Brian Flores as their head man. And Austin Hooper, tight end for the Atlanta Falcons, is going to hit free agency and is expected to land one of the biggest deals, probably maybe potentially a record-breaking deal for tight ends in NFL history, with, obviously free agency can become a bidding war and teams are offering you tons of money to stay or come join their team, and that can obviously be a very, very costly deal. But now we're going to get into some more free agent news and some trade rumors around the league, starting with the Browns eyeing Case Keenum and Chase Daniel. Obviously, this is significant because obviously you never know what that potentially mean. Obviously, Case Keenum has been a guy who is a serviceable starting quarterback in this league. He has been for Minnesota, which he led to the NFC Championship game, and has been with Washington, who he's played for this past season. Chase Daniel has been really mainly a career backup, but has been a solid backup for most of his career. Obviously, I feel like this is one of those things they're just trying to solidify their backup quarterback position behind Baker Mayfield, but also probably bring in a veteran presence behind Baker Mayfield at the same time. It's definitely something I think, will be interesting moving forward. Obviously, Baker is going into this season trying to change some things up. Obviously, he's trying to get a little slimmer. Baker has always kind of looked a little heavy set a little bit sometimes, but he's trying to lose weight and slimmer down and get quicker. He's also trying to work a little harder this offseason, not talk as much, trying to really get his career on track under new coaching and Kevin Stefanski, and obviously under new regime under Barry, and just trying to get his career back on track so people don't end up saying that he's a bust and end up saying that he isn't what they all expected. So obviously it's going to be very important for them to make sure that he's good. But I'm sure, obviously, if something happens, Baker struggles, I guess if you have to bench him, you want to make sure you have a good veteran player who can come in and play, obviously, because backup quarterback, I think, is one of the most important positions in the league. It's one of the most, and it definitely probably is the most important backup position in the league, because you need a guy who, if your quarterback goes down for maybe a month or so, that you feel like we can bring him in, we can still run the offense that we run, and he can still be effective. You don't, because you've seen too many examples in this league where a quarterback goes down, and then their backup is very inept, and then the offense is completely ineffective, and then it's just like you're losing almost every game that you play with him because the offense can barely move the ball because the quarterback is a very inept quarterback and cannot play that well at this level. You never want to put yourself in that position, so you want to always make sure that you have a very good backup quarterback backing up your starter, so moving forward, if some type of bad thing happens, you got a guy you can come in and play well. Obviously, we know about the big story with this situation with Philadelphia and Nick Foles. Obviously, Carson Wentz MVP season, it looked like, got hurt, out for the season, out for the playoffs. Nick Foles comes in there and leads them to a Super Bowl. So you never know. You might have one of those runs. You never really know sometimes. That's why it's very important to make sure that your backup quarterback position is secure and you're not going through a struggle of thinking, oh, he's not good enough, our offense is inept, we need something better, because sometimes that can get you fired, not having a good backup quarterback. So, but in other news, Titans are working to get a deal done with Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, Ryan Tannehill is known as one of the saviors of their season. Obviously, when he came into the offense really picked up. The passing game became very explosive. And the Tennessee Titans made that magical run to the AFC Championship game before losing to the eventual Super Bowl champ Kansas City Chiefs. I think the Titans know you really probably won't be able to get an upgrade over Tannehill, so you might as well lock him up. Now, I don't think there'll be like any 5-6 year deal, but I could see it maybe being 2 to 3 years, potentially. I think I understand why they want to lock him up, because with the team they have, unless they just completely fall off the bricks next year, even if they are still in the playoff hunt, you're going to have a mid to late first round pick. So more than likely, you're not going to pick up a guy who you maybe feel like can come in as soon as that year starts and be your new quarterback. And obviously, we know how hard it is to sign or trade for a starting quarterback in this league. So I feel like that personally, they feel like this is probably the best move for us right now. Keep Tannehill here. We don't know what's going to happen with Mariota. I'm sure when his contract's up, I feel like they won't renew him. But right now, you might as well keep him around. And you just work with what you got. And then you just try to get better. Because maybe they feel like, oh, we can get better in other spots. Maybe be better around Ryan. And then maybe somehow make another run. And obviously, their biggest deal they have to make is Derek Henry. Derek Henry's his contract is going to be up. And you're going to need to pay him a lot of money. You're going to pay him top running back money. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how much they actually end up giving Ryan Tannehill to be their quarterback for the next couple of years, how long the contract is going to be, and that's going to really give you an indication of what they think of him moving forward as their quarterback. Because obviously they feel like, well, we made the AFC Championship with this guy, so why couldn't we make it back to the playoffs again with him? As the full quarterback, a full offseason as being the starter. You know, obviously A.J. Brown, who was considered our best receiver last year, who was a rookie, getting better. Corey Davis getting better. You know, you feel like we can improve the supporting cast around him. Our defense can get better. And you may feel like Tennessee, why can't we have another great year next year, make the playoffs again next year, and make a run next year? I feel like if you're the Tennessee Titans. Other news. The 49ers could potentially trade Marquise Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin, before Emmanuel Sanders, was kind of the number one guy. He is a speedster, runs 4.2, ran with the U.S. Olympic track team. And so I feel like they're going to go ahead and shop him because they feel like with the receivers they have, it's pretty much bunched up and he doesn't really have much room there anymore, especially with Emmanuel Sanders there. I think he could be a great addition for any team who maybe needs a guy who needs to go over the top. I could potentially see a team like his former team, Buffalo, potentially maybe trying to make a trade to get him back to Buffalo. I wouldn't be surprised with New England because sometimes they like to kick tires on receivers to give a deep threat if they bring back Tom Brady. Any team, like I said, any team that just really needs a guy who can open up the offense, I could see someone making a flyer and putting out something on Marquise Goodwin because of his speed. His speed is very well appreciated around the league, and a lot of teams would love to have a guy like that they can send deep with 4.2 speed and outrun your corner or your safety and make big plays down the field. Definitely might want to keep an eye out for that because you don't know who actually might go ahead and pick him up and make that deal. And sometimes those low key trades, those trades that don't make a lot of news, could be sometimes one of those trades that actually can change a season. You just never really know. And lastly, the Giants really star linebacker Alec Ogletree. He has been a top 10 linebacker. I think some people would feel like in the league for the last 5-6 years since he's came out of Georgia. This is obviously a cap casualty move. They feel like for where he is at his career, he's still very serviceable, still could be a starting linebacker in this league. No doubt about it, but they just feel like with the money they're paying him, they feel like they need to make this move to get younger. So obviously he adds a valuable linebacker free agent on the market. Any team that needs to improve at linebacker will take a look at Alec Ogletree. He's been a solid guy. He's been probably one of the most, he's obviously he hasn't had the greatest years there in terms of success on the defensive end as a defense as a whole, but he's been one of those guys who's been consistently good every year he's played for them. And, obviously he's just a guy you can bring in. He's going to play consistent. He's going to play well. And, will be interesting to see the numbers he might end up getting, but, I think he'll improve and help any team that needs any help at their linebacker position, and definitely will be plenty of looks in free agency when it comes around and people are looking to sign a linebacker. But coming up next, we're going to go into some news, some talks, contract talks, also some players maybe not returning, and players looking, obviously with the draft coming up and the combine looking up, coaches saying they're looking at all their options. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Back to the GSMC Football Podcast. last segment, we talked about just some free agency news and notes. Obviously, the Browns looking at bringing either Keith or Chase Daniel. I discussed how important it is to have a quality quarterback. It's one of the most important positions in all of the NFL. Because if you don't have a quality quarterback and something happens to your starter and your season derails, it can get you fired. It can really, change a lot of things within the organization. It can derail expectations. And sometimes you really just need a guy who can come in there and win you some games. And then if the quarterback can get back that season, still be able to pick up where you left off and still have continued and sustained success going into the future. The Titans are working to get a deal on Ryan Tannehill. I discussed how it'll be interesting to see the numbers in that deal because that'll show you how much they value Ryan and also how long that deal is to see how long they want to keep Ryan around. So that might give you maybe an indication of maybe when they would maybe try to go get a quarterback for the future. The 49ers are probably looking to chop Marquise Goodwin, deep threat, a guy who can run faster than anybody in the league. It could be a great deep threat for anybody who needs a deep threat at wide receiver on their team. And the Giants release Alec Ogletree, star linebacker for the Giants for the last few years. Cap casualty, these things happen. He'll be definitely looked at by multiple teams on the market. I'm sure he won't rush into anything, but some teams will definitely show interest. So now we're going to get into some more talk around the league. And the Cowboys and Dak Prescott have renewed talks. They are now talking now that the franchise tag period has now opened. They're going to talk about a new deal. Obviously, this is obviously a big story just because it's the Cowboys and it's Dak. Obviously, people are having some suspicions that if the Cowboys don't give Dak what he wants, it could potentially get ugly. Could Dak maybe miss some camp? Could Dak maybe miss some training camp? Could he, be more vocal about how he's displeased with being franchised if they did decide to franchise tag him? These are things that obviously I think you don't want to do. And obviously we can't forget about the other big free agent they have to re-sign in Amari Cooper. It feels like they can't sign everybody back, but I think they're definitely going to try. It's definitely something I think is interesting. And that's just the offensive side of the ball for the Cowboys. Defensively, they still got to decide they're going to re-sign Byron Jones, which the expectation is they won't. But obviously, this is big if the Cowboys can get this deal done because you don't want this lingering over your organization, especially with new head coach Mike McCarthy, bringing him his system and his regime. And you don't want the lingerance of, okay, is he going to be around? Is he going to play? Is he going to, you know what I'm saying? That's going to be the question. Is he going to be there for when they need him to learn that offense and to get this team where they think they could be potentially, which is the playoff team next year? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when it comes to that. We hope that they can work the deal out and that it doesn't have to go into franchise tag territory because every player hates the franchise tag. Because every player wants that right and that freedom to say, if you're not willing to pay me, let me go to a team that will. Yes, I want to stay here, but I also want to get paid my value. And a franchise tag is looked at almost as a cuff. You're handcuffing them. You're not allowing them to leave, even though you're not even sure if you're even going to pay them. It's kind of weird because maybe 4 or 5 years, you try to franchise tag them. And it's just like, you're telling me 4 or 5 years and you're still wondering if you should pay me. And then you want me to play another year for you guys just to see if y'all gonna pay me next year. And then y'all could franchise tag me again. I think it's just everybody wants that long-term, security. They want to know that, hey, I'm wanted and I'm going to be here. I don't want this year to year. Oh, we got to go through this again. And I got to see if we're going to have to leave or I'm going to stay. Am I going to get what I deserve? Are they going to try to get me to fold so they can give me the money they want to give me, not the money I did think I deserve? It's obviously a part of the business of the NFL. It can be very complicated. It can be very complex. It really just depends, it's one of those things that everybody hates. And you never want to deal with. You want to make sure the situation is resolved and that everybody's happy at the end of the day. Because you got to think about the team and you got to think about yourself on both sides. But also, coming out of some more draft news though, the Redskins, Ron Rivera, head coach, says they're going to look at all the options when it comes to QB. Obviously, this raised some eyebrows because obviously Dwayne Haskins is a guy that people thought the Redskins drafted to be their quarterback of the future. Obviously, last year he didn't play the best, struggled, he made some improvements towards the end of the year, but struggled. So some people are wondering, do they even believe in him? Remember, Ron Rivera did not draft Dwayne Haskins. This regime did not draft Dwayne Haskins. But he is a young quarterback who was just a rookie last year and was a first-round rookie on top of that. And so, I think obviously he's going to do his due diligence and look and see, do I like a guy enough where I feel like, you know what, we're going to give up on Dwayne and go for a new guy. Now, I think the expectation is that they're still going to go with Dwayne into next season because the Redskins have other glaring holes they need. And at least you have a quarterback that you could work with potentially and be your guy. It's not like, oh, this is a guy who's been there for 6 years and you know what he is, and so you probably need to restart. It's one of those situations where he's young. You don't know what he could be, and you might want to see, hey, we can wait a year potentially to see what we got if I put maybe more talent around him. And if he continues to struggle, then we know next year, okay, yeah, we need to make an adjustment. We need to make a change. So I think Ron Rivera can play his cards here. I don't feel like they're in any rush to draft one for sure. I think they're going to go ahead and stick with Dwayne next year. But obviously unless there's a guy that you just fall in love with, that you just love, that's obviously something. Don't be surprised if they maybe draft someone late. 4th round maybe, 5th round maybe, a guy that they can develop. Not saying, again, that he's going to replace Dwayne, but you never know if they could find a gem. And then if Dwayne struggles, you put him in and he plays well, then he could be your guy going into next year. These are all potential possibilities in the NFL because anything can happen in this league. Obviously, we've seen it on multiple occasions. So I think he's just doing his due diligence. He's just looking to make sure, like, hey, I don't want to definitively say that he's going to be our guy because obviously, it makes it seem like maybe you're not potentially being transparent completely because you don't want to say someone's your guy, then you draft the guy because then it's like, I thought he was your guy. Like, you always want to leave that open of possibility there. So that way, if something does happen, no one's surprised by it and everybody understands. And then, people can then make their own decisions based off that situation. And you make the best decision that you think is best for the team moving forward for the success long term. Obviously, with Ron Rivera bringing in a new regime that he brought from Carolina to Washington to rebuild this franchising, to get them back to winning on a consistent basis in the NFC East. I think that's definitely something that he has to do and has to look into moving forward. Lastly, it has also been reported that Jason Witten probably will not be returning to the Dallas Cowboys. So obviously, he's been one of the longest tenured Cowboys and one of the best Cowboys to ever suit up. Probably one of the best tight ends, if not the best Dallas Cowboy tight end to ever suit up. And it looks like he will not be returning. Obviously, earlier in this offseason, they reported that he's linked to Giants because of Jason Garrett. And he might go there potentially when free agency hits to end his career with Jason Garrett, his former head coach, which then would become his, current head coach if he decided to make that move. Obviously, Jason Witten at this point in his career is more of just a red zone target, a guy who can just, maybe get open in the red zone. He's not really going to do too much for you in any other part of the game. He's still a decent blocking tight end at this point in his career, can get you a catch here or there, but he's not anybody who's going to break away or get any space from everybody. He's just someone who, hey, get down in the red zone. He could be maybe your second, third tight end. I think on a good team, he could be your second or third best tight end. I don't think he should be your first. Obviously, the Giants have Evan Ingram, so I think he would definitely be a great mentor to Evan Ingram on the Giants and, go from there. So, obviously, that's coming to an end with the Dallas Cowboys. Jason Witten probably moving on from them, probably moving on to the Giants. But you never know who else might have potential interest in bringing him in and making him a part of their organization. But coming up next, I'm gonna discuss with you guys how important is the NFL Combine. Is it maybe potentially more important than a pro day? All that and more right here on the podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some news and notes around the league. Obviously, Jason Witten is not expected to return to the Dallas Cowboys, looking like he will move on and choose a new path and a new career with a new team in probably his last year as a player in the NFL at tight end. Obviously, Ron Rivera, the head coach of the Redskins, says that they are looking at all options when it comes to the quarterback. Obviously raising some concerns that could they potentially be replacing Dwayne Haskins. I don't think they are, but obviously they're just doing their due diligence and looking at every option available that is presented to them. And Cowboys, Dak Prescott renew contract talks. Obviously this is big because obviously the franchise tag period is just open and is going to be very important that they can potentially work out a deal before they have to make a decision to franchise Dak, which Dak has publicly said he does not want and could potentially cause issues in the future if they do not solve and fix moving down the road. And now I'm about to talk to y'all about the NFL Combine. Obviously, the NFL Scouting Combine is coming up this week, 4-day event, Thursday to Sunday. And I'm going to talk to y'all about how important it is. And also how important a pro day is compared to it. Obviously, the NFL Combine has been labeled the biggest job interview in football that you can have. Like, this is the place where you really can make money or lose money. This is the place where you can move up 2 rounds or go down 2 rounds to undrafted. This is the place where everybody may see some of the things that they want to watch with you and say, how does he do in this environment? Now, obviously, it's a little skewed because you truly don't know in underwear. That's what they call the underwear Olympics, without people around them, how good they are in game, except from the film that you've seen. But at least it gives you an idea, which is why the Combine is such a big deal. So I think it's very important that they come out there and compete and they put on their best performances. I like to say it's really for guys who either want to solidify their spot. Teams have a lot of questions about and want to see in certain drills what they have, certain numbers like the 40 or the height or the jump or, things like that. Like I said, it's for guys who maybe you're borderlining a 3rd round pick, then completely blow up the Combine, has exponentially great numbers, and does fantastic at the drills, and now they're moving into a late 1st round pick. Guys who could be late 1st round picks, don't run as fast as expected, don't jump as far as expected, don't perform as accurately as expected, and then drop to the 4th round, 3rd round. These are all things that could potentially happen in because of the NFL Scouting Combine. Obviously, as you've known in previous years, usually players that are top 10 and up usually don't participate because they already know that what they are, and this is not going to really benefit them. But that's when also because they like to cite, like if you're a quarterback throwing, a lot of the receivers you're throwing to, you probably have never thrown to before. So like they like to wait till they get to their pro day to throw the receivers they're used to, so then they can accurately give the best performance that they can give you. Now, obviously, you may make the argument, well, you're going to be throwing new receivers when you get drafted, so you need to go see how you do with new receivers anyway. But that's how some players are. Chase Young, for example, he was invited. He's showing up, but he's not going to run. I think he'll run, but he's not doing any of the on-field drills. Which, he has the power to do it. He knows I'm going probably number 2 at max, maybe number 3 overall. Why do I need to go out here and do drills and prove anything to anybody if I'm already going to be a top 5 pick? Why would I need to do anything? Take a chance with my health potentially. I could see that. I could see why he wouldn't go out there. He'll probably do the measurables. Cause I think most players do the measurables because they're just like, I'll give you that. And obviously, because of the media interviews that came and led up to it, you do that too. But I think Chase Young knows there's no point. Obviously, Tua's there, can't work because of injury, but still can give teams interviews and times to meet with them and build a connection. Obviously, Burrow probably isn't going to do too much. Obviously, like I said, top guys. But other players are going to do it to solidify themselves, like the receiver, Jarrett Jeudy or Henry Ruggs. So with the top receivers coming out, both from Alabama, like people, obviously Ruggs said he thinks he can beat John Ross's 4.22 record that he was set at the combine. So obviously, as you can tell, you know, in this draft, you know, obviously this is big. Now, if you compare it to the pro day obviously is a day where, you know, obviously everybody from that school who's going to the draft will have a day, will be with the coaches that they were with, you know, through college, and, you know, basically work out for teams in front of them. Obviously, these pro days for each colleges, obviously teams can then select if they want to send a scout out there or not. Usually, obviously, teams like Clemson, Alabama usually get every team there. Maybe smaller schools get a few teams there. I mean, it's basically a second interview process. I like to call it the follow-up interview. Basically, okay, this is what we saw at the combine. Now, this is like the follow-up, more of a confirmation. I like to say a confirmation meeting. Okay, so you did this, but can you do this now? Like, let's say you didn't do good at the combine, but you do better at the pro day. It's a way you can redeem yourself if you're a player. If something happened, you can maybe redeem yourself at the pro day. It's like I said, it's the second time teams can meet with you, see you work out, train, do different drills. You know, obviously, you know, help yourself, help your stock moving forward. Because like I said, every time you go out here and you're doing this, you want to make sure that you put your best foot forward and you put maximum effort going forward, because you want to make sure that your team is already ready at all times to be able to compete at the highest level. And as a player, you don't want a team to see you and say, I'm still questioning you after the draft. Because these processes, you've heard in previous years, they ask these players weird questions because they're trying to figure out what type of kid are they? What's their mental fortitude? What's their intelligence? That's why people like to talk about the Wonderlic test, because it shows how smart you are. It's things like that. It's a very extensive process. And you gotta think about it for these kids coming out of college. You're getting grilled for months from teams trying to figure out, are you even draftable in their eyes? Why should we take a chance on you bringing you on our team when I could maybe get somebody else at your position? That's why they call it one of the biggest interviews, probably one of the longest interviews ever that you'll ever have in your life. It's like a multi-month interview. And it's definitely something that, you know, obviously is just a very exciting but very intense time for all these guys. And like I said, this NFL Combine starts all of that. It starts that process truly, where, like I said, you really could help yourself. You can make some money during the NFL Scouting Combine. You can really build and come up during the NFL Scouting Combine. And that's what I think every player who goes out here to the Combine or the Pro Days, they look to do. They want to build their stock. They want to rise in the ranks. They want to solidify themselves in the eyes of these teams. You may learn about names if you watch the Combine that you didn't know before. Now you like, oh, I kind of like him. And then you kind of have maybe a hope that your team drafts him. It's really a part of, it's just a part of it all. I mean, it's a time where, you know, I like to call it something where they say a lot of girlfriends don't really, I mean, a lot of girlfriends like it because, like, I guess it's guys in their underwear, but at the same time, it can also, they look at you and be like, do you really watch this? Because you're just watching people do workouts for 2-3 hours of your day. But if you're a football fanatic, you love it. You love it because you feel like during this process, you could be a scout for your own team. Even though you won't going to be able to tell them anything, you can look at what you remember seeing from college football season and seeing what you see in the Combine and say, man, I really would like him on my team. I really hope my franchise or my organization goes out of their way to get this guy. Obviously, names that teams, that players have been linked to teams, you're going to like, okay, so who are we supposed to watch in the Combine that are connected to us right now? And stuff like that. And I think that's just going to be one of the things that I think is going to always linger around. The NFL Combine is a very important time. Pro days are very important. Every day leading up to the draft is very important because now we're hitting the home stretch. The draft is at the end of the month in April, and this is going to be a very extensive process that every team is going to go through, and all these players are going to go through to hopefully get a job and get drafted to a team where they can start their career. But that's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'm your host, Brice Lewis. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.